Wide lenses on the GFX system are definitely lacking a bit. For the longest time, the 23mm was the widest, and then Fuji came out with the GF20-35mm lens, which was a phenomenal lens. I put out a bunch of videos on that lens, mainly pixel peeping videos. Check that out if you want to for a more in-depth look, definitely more in-depth than we're going on this video. So the question that I see a lot of people ask, similarly to the question of should I get the 110 or the 80mm, which I put out a mega video on that if you want to check out as well. Everyone wants to know, is the 23 worth it or not with the GF20-35mm lens? And we're going to answer that in today's video. Fuji was awesome enough to send me both the lenses to test out for a bit, along with the GF55mm 1.7, which I'm recording this video on. So if the autofocus is really bad, shooting a video at 1.7 is probably not the best idea, but you could come to that conclusion for yourself. We're all over the place in this video. I promise it's gonna be a pretty scientific video of comparisons. We're gonna get to the bottom of which lens, at least I recommend, at the end of this video, and see if the 23 is even a worthy purchase at this point with the wide zoom out. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button and all that stuff, and let's get into it. I'm just gonna throw some of the specs in a comparison on the screen right now. Take a look at that, pause it if you'd like. And let's jump right into the build. Both these lenses are exceptionally well made and feel very premium, just like most GFX lenses. Let's take a look at the official titles of these lenses first, which we can compare and contrast a little bit. First, we have the GF23mm f4 RLMWR. So this lens is an equivalent of 18mm, and obviously it has an aperture of f4. R denotes an aperture ring, the LM is a linear motor, and the WR is weather sealed. For the zoom, we have the GF20-35mm RWR lens. R for the aperture ring, WR for the weather sealed. This lens does not have a linear motor. The purpose of a linear motor is to provide fast and also quiet autofocus. Kind of unsure why this lens does not have the linear motor, as it is a premium lens. Pretty much all the GF zooms have this feature except the 35 to 70mm lens, which is a budget lens, so I understand that. For the most part, I feel linear motor kind of is similar to image stabilization. Most wider lenses, even zooms, do not have image stabilization on a wide lens. And I'm noticing the trend is pretty similar for linear motor as well. So obviously these lenses are both f4. The GF23 is a 18mm equivalent. The GF20-35mm is a 16 to 28mm equivalent. So you have 2 extra millimeters on the zoom, which actually makes a pretty big difference in my opinion. Both these lenses share the same filter thread size of 82mm, and if you are like me and you bought all your NDs at 82mm, this is pretty convenient because you don't have to use a step-up filter. The minimum focal distance is pretty similar on these lenses. On the 23, you have 15 inches. On the 20 and 35, you have a 13.7 inch minimum focal distance. So kind of splitting hairs at this point. But the real interesting point is the price. On the Prime, you have $2,600. On the Zoom, we have $2,500. So it's interesting because the Zoom is actually a little bit cheaper. And lastly in this section, talk about the front element. It's pretty similar in size and appearance on both lenses. Let's take a look at these lenses lined up together. And as you can see, the zoom is definitely a bit larger than the Prime. Aside from that, these lenses are pretty similar in appearance, with the real main exception being a zoom ring on the 20-35mm. As for the weight, on paper, the GF20-35mm has a weight of 725 grams and a real-life measurement, including the end cap, of about 751 grams, while the GF23mm has an on-paper measurement of 845 grams and a real-life measurement of 868 grams. So let's not sugarcoat it, these lenses are definitely pretty heavy, and with the zoom being about 120 grams lighter than the Prime, that's a pretty big deal. Unless weight doesn't matter to you, but if you are using this lens for street photography or HDR long exposure, walking around, finding different spots in the city or wherever you live, it really does make a pretty big difference. But if you're one of those people who just gets in your car, drives to a spot, takes out your gear, it's probably not gonna matter to you. Let's briefly talk about the sound for these lenses, specifically autofocus sound. Both these lenses are really quiet, but let's just take a quick listen. To be honest, I can't really tell which lens is quieter. We're kind of splitting hairs at this point. I think the autofocus sound is just slightly different. This isn't that big of a deal. Both are just really quiet. With the 110 versus the 80mm, that autofocus sound definitely was much more substantial. The 80 was a lot louder than the 110, and depending on your use for this lens, it could make a difference. But in this situation, it really doesn't matter. You can go either direction. Sound is not really a big deal. Let's take a look at the autofocus for both these lenses. So I think one of the best things you can do, especially when doing a lens review or a comparison, is jump into Lightroom and pixel peep. For most of the time when you're pixel peeping, people are just like, wow, you're just pixel peeping too deep, this and that, blah, blah, blah. In this situation, it's very important. So let's jump into Lightroom and take a look at some images. The first test we're gonna do is a one-to-one comparison. And what I basically did was I set my tripod down and I put my 100S on it, and the only thing I did was swap lenses. I kept the settings the exact same, and I tried my hardest to get the zoom to be 23mm. Let's take a look at the first shot. So we have the zoom on the left, prime on the right, and let's just take a look at 100% here. And as we can see, we definitely have a sharp center point. And zooming in, let's just jump right into 200% here. And it looks like focus was indeed in the center. It looks like they're both pretty sharp. I would say we're at 200% here, and it's in public, so you know it's a bit much, but it's looking like the zoom is a bit sharper. And if we just go over to the corners here, let's go back to 100. If we just go to the corners, we'll see that the corners on the 23 look pretty bad. The zoom looks a lot better. Let's take a look at this corner. Same thing. The corners are definitely a little bit softer on the prime, and this corner looks pretty close, but a little bit more sharper on the zoom. And same thing, the corners on the top on the prime do not look that great. And overall, it looks like everything is decently sharp in the center. I'd give the win on this image to the zoom. Jumping into example number 2, we have the Hudson Yards skyline, if you will, and let's jump right into the center, going right to 200%. Looks like both are pretty sharp. Again, the zoom on the left, prime on the right. I'd say the zoom, again, is a little bit sharper. They're both sharp, and we're definitely pixel peeping here, but that is the purpose. The stop sign looks a lot sharper on the zoom. Looks a little soft on the prime. And if we keep going over, we can tell that everything is in focus for sure. The zoom does look a bit sharper though. We have similar distortion, although it looks like the 23 is a little bit more tilted, but I could be wrong here. Again, as we get to the corners, it looks like the 23, it just is a bit softer. And let's zoom into the top. And we can't really, it's hard to judge because I'm sure we had a little bit of wind, but let's just say again, a little soft. Yeah, I'd say overall, you get some wonkiness in the corners on the 23, and not that the zoom is perfect, but definitely less of it on the zoom. The zoom overall, again, I'd give the win to the zoom. And example number 3, let's zoom into the center. Again, it looks like the zoom is a bit sharper. Both are pretty sharp, but maybe there's a slight misfocus on the 23. I'm not sure. It looks a little bit soft. It looks like this stop sign looks like they're pretty even, to be honest. This building is sharper on the zoom, a little bit softer on the prime. And as we go into the corner again, it looks like, yeah, 23 again, a little soft. Can't really judge the sky. Let's look at this corner. Yeah, again, the 23 is just a little smidge bit softer, but you know, I think at this image specifically in that corner, you're splitting hairs. Zooming into this building, Yeah, overall, the zoom, it's pretty sharp, pretty edge to edge. The 23 is just not as sharp here. This video is sponsored by V-Flat World, and I'm excited to tell you about one of their products, Duo Boards. Duo Boards are double-sided backdrops that come in two sizes, 24 by 24 or 40 by 30 inches. And they're made with PVC, so you don't have to worry about getting them wet. But most importantly, they elevate your product shoots. Here, I'm shooting a scene and I'm not sure what backdrop would work best, so I've rigged up some stands, a crossbar, and some clips, just so I could swap between Duo Boards quickly and determine which would have the best look. They have over 25 boards to choose from, and they're all double-sided, so that gives over 50 possible styles. V-Flat World also just released a version 2 of their V-Flats, which are available for pre-order on their website right now. They include new features such as a magnetic closure system to stop light leakage, and a protective edge to help with durability and more. I'll link to V-Flat World below so you can check them out. And now back to the review. And our last example, let's just zoom on in and 200% here. 23 on the right. This is definitely not as sharp. Again, it's hard to tell. It looks like it's totally in focus towards the top of the building though. It does get a little soft on the prime. And if we zoom out a little bit, yeah, overall, this building looks a little sharper on the zoom. And if we just go into the corner, zoom out a little bit, yeah, the 23 just looks a little bit, I don't know, blurry in the corners. Less out of focus, more like blurry, and it looks like the color gets a little weird. Let's take a look at this corner. Yeah, definitely. It almost looks a little bit like motion blur, but it's not. Yeah, the zoom is super sharp in this corner. Let's jump to this corner. Same thing, super sharp on the zoom. This 23, a little soft here. And let's just look here. If we look at this sign, it looks pretty sharp on the 23, but just a little bit sharper on the zoom. And let's just take a look in the center again. Let's look at this license plate. Sharper on the zoom. Overall, I would say after looking at all these images, the zoom is definitely way sharper, and also sharper and less distorted in the corners. One of the earlier times I borrowed lenses from Fuji, it was the GF23, and I took a bunch of shots that I really liked. So ultimately what I did was, when I had the zoom, I went back and photographed some of the same exact spots for some of my favorite shots, and I tried to match them up the best I could. So this is not a one-to-one. More or less, my point in this section that I want to show is that ultimately 3mm makes a pretty big difference. So as you can see, I kind of cropped these to line them up. So ultimately, as you can see, I got basically more of the rocks in on the GF23 shot. So I was in a pretty similar spot for both of these shots, pretty much very close to the same spot. Maybe over a year apart though. And if we zoom in, we can see that on the 23, I was at 27, almost 28mm. So a little bit, you know, longer on the zoom, but as you can see, decently sharp here. It looks like the 23 is actually like kind of pushing it, but maybe, you know, is a little bit darker, and also maybe the contrast is a little higher in the edit. But overall, we could see that the zoom needed a little bit more correction. If we go into edit, we can see there's no crop applied at all. So it looks like the 23, I could have told you from the previous section, is a little bit less distorted. I'm not sure if it has to do with either being the zoom or if it has to do with being the wider lens. I'm not sure, but tends to need a little bit more correction from what I found. So next up, we have a Radio City shot. And what's cool about this is both of these are panos. I couldn't answer you right off the bat with how many pictures they each required. Basically, in doing panos at 20mm versus panos at 23, you just get so much more of the picture. I'm also a little bit closer to the building, but nevertheless, panoing at 20, you get a lot more picture in on it, but you know, you do get a little bit more distortion. So I think that this looks a little bit more distorted than this building. And jumping into another shot, this was a pretty major pano. I know I shot a decent amount of images into this one and this one as well. As you can see, again, a little bit more correction needed on the zoom lens. These are pretty different, so I'm not gonna really go too much more in here, but I did like both the shots. And lastly, I think this is the best one-to-one in this section. I clearly wasn't in the exact same spot, but I was close. And ultimately, with the zoom at 20, you just get so much more of the scene in the shot. Definitely is it looks a little bit more distorted, just like what we talked about. Yeah, on this 23, I don't feel like this is a wide enough shot. I really like getting more of this building, and of course, a little bit more on the top, a little bit more room to breathe. But they do have different looks. But if it were up to me, I would pick the zoom here. I like to get really wide open shots when I'm doing street work. Lastly, in this pixel peeping section, I just wanted to pixel peep a little bit more and kind of give you my final thoughts and just talk about each image kind of as its own and maybe compare a little bit. We'll see. Up first, we have the shot I took at Jane's Carousel, and I really love this shot taken with the 23. And not too much to report here, but I went back. I didn't include this in my one-to-one because the first section, because, you know, it wasn't a real one-to-one. I didn't really line them up too close. But as you can see, I took this with the 20mm, and the distortion is just pretty real. I think I contradicted myself with the distortion. It's kind of weird, like the corners get distorted, but overall, like the picture as a whole will just be so much more distorted on the zoom than the prime. And yeah, this is a shot where I tried to correct it. I'll do it really quickly. I feel like it looks really corrected, and so I'm not really into this correction. Similarly, this is a shot taken with the 23, and I took another version of this, but I took it landscape. This, I think you get a decent amount of the image and definitely a decent amount of the building above. If we look at the wide version I took, you know, it's just from a different angle and it's not a real one-to-one, but I took this at 20, and obviously, you know, you have major distortion on these buildings and this tree. It's just, the distortion is real on the 20 for sure. This was a shot I took on the 23. I really love this shot, but yeah, this is just a single shot. And what's cool about this shot on the Manhattan Bridge, there's so many vibrations from the train. It just takes forever to take a shot like this. You really got to time it perfectly. Super minimal distortion. You definitely have some atmospheric like distortion on this, but just such a cool shot. If we go into, it's just a small crop, and I did do a guided correction. The correction was pretty minimal, as you can see. If we go back to the correction, I just kind of adjusted it slightly just to kind of level it out. Nothing too crazy. One more with the 23. Obviously 3mm, it's a bit wider on the zoom. Pretty minimal distortion here, like even on this sign. We zoom in, you know, you have a little bit of distortion on these lanterns, but not too crazy. And one more example. So a shot like this, I basically had it on an angle. The camera was almost vertical, and you know, pretty minimal distortion here. And that's definitely something to be said. If we go towards the corners, we'll see the same thing happening where they get really soft. But overall, you kind of trade off like the softness in the corners for very minimal distortion. And if we take a look at some shots I took with the wide zoom, at 20mm, like obviously you could see a bunch of distortion here. You know, if you correct this, it works, but you can't really fake this amount of imagery. Maybe AI could do it. But yeah, I don't think it's really ideal. You just get a ton of distortion on a shot like this. But if I took it with the 23, we wouldn't have enough image in the shot. And an image like this, also taken at 20. This is a cool shot. I really like this street. If we turn off the correction, you know, naturally you have a lot of distortion. And I almost feel like I like it better when it is corrected. But again, you just have to fill in this space, which for this shot specifically, it's not too bad, but still is a decent amount of correction that we have to do. But lastly, I will leave you with this image, and this image has zero correction. I'm obviously taking this at a slight angle. I thought it would be kind of cool because you have all these lines and squares, and it's kind of like trippy, you know, like Ocarina of Time going down that hallway in the forest temple type of thing. What's funny about this shot is I shot this at 20 and it doesn't feel too distorted despite the fact that I'm on a crazy angle. So, you know, I think the name of the game here is when you shoot with the wide zoom all the way at 20, you are gonna get a lot more distortion than you will the 23. However, overall, it's a lot sharper. And I think it really just comes down to, are you getting the angle 100% nailed? Kind of like, you know, the 18 to 16 on the XF system. If you're shooting at 8mm and you are not nailing that angle, it's gonna look super distorted. But it's kind of like the same thing here, just a little bit less extreme because obviously it's not as wide. And lastly, I will leave you with some of my favorite images that I took with both of these lenses. So in summary, both these lenses are within $100 of each other in terms of MSRP, both f4, both super sharp, and of course cover a similar focal length. So which lens should you buy? The first question I have for you is, do you only like to shoot primes? Well, obviously buy the 23. And then second, do you buy your lenses used? If so, taking a look at eBay, at least at the time of this video, you could find most of the 23mm listings for around $1,400 USD. And just using eBay as a really quick reference, I mean, you could buy your lenses through Adorama or B&H used, and they have a great scale of quality, but that's a pretty solid deal off the MSRP. Most of the used 20 to 35mm lenses on eBay are around $2,000. So obviously it's a lot newer, so therefore the price doesn't come down a lot. And to be honest, the reason that there's so many 23mm for such a cheap deal is because all the people selling it pretty much are selling that lens to fund the 20 to 35mm purchase. So the 20 to 35mm price remains high. If price doesn't really matter and you're gonna pay the iron price for that GF glass, I would personally go with the GF20 to 35mm. You have the benefits of a zoom lens. It is $100 cheaper MSRP. It's definitely lighter, so it's easier to walk around with, and it's even a little bit sharper, at least in my opinion. You could really tell which is the better lens when you pull up eBay and you're taking a look at the prices. If everyone really jumped ship when the zoom came out and sold the 23, well, it's a pretty solid lens and the masses have spoken. I hope you found this comparison helpful. Massive shout out to Fujifilm again for sending me both these lenses to test out. Please consider subscribing if you are not already. Hit that thumbs up button. I have links to everything in the description, affiliate links and all that if you want to help this channel out or buy me a coffee, all that type of stuff. Stay tuned for more videos and I'll catch you in the next one.